Today we're going to be talking about a topic that's around when budgets shrink, strategy matters, how digital marketing can help. So, first off, I just want to say that today's webinar, our hope is that it's almost more like a podcast episode. Aidan and I are going to kind of banter back and forth and talk a little bit. And this is honestly kind of um, a list of things maybe, or us bringing together kind of things that have been on our mind recently over the last, I guess, really since the beginning of the year. And Aidan and I have spent a lot of time talking about it. And so we decided that instead of just talking about it just between the two of us, it might be a fun thing to get on a webinar and kind of share some of our ideas and thoughts as we see them today, March 25th, and what's kind of been building since really the beginning of the year. And so before we
An
get
eventful few months, no doubt.
for sure. And so before we get too far in, we're going to just give some quick introductions about ourselves, and then we'll just kind of dive right into the topic. So my name's Bradley Martin. I'm the VP of Marketing here at Feathr. Most importantly, I'm a husband to Mandy and a dad to Liam, Luca, Lawson, and Emmy. We like this is our favorite ice cream joint here in Nashville. And so we spend a lot of time, eating ice cream, hanging out after sports events. And so my contact information's there. If you'd like to connect with me anyway, I'd love to connect with you guys. Aidan, wants to share a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, I'm Aidan. Always funny to see this photo. I'm the co-founder and chief revenue officer over here at Feathr. Fun fact: this photo is from a peer-to-peer fundraiser. I was doing a local version of Dancing with the Stars, and this was the promo thing they did for me. Passionate supporter of nonprofits. I'm on a number of boards. Was a Boy Scout, Eagle Scout. That's how I got exposed to the nonprofit sector. Been just fully immersed and embedded in the social good sector, and proud to be able to support it here today with Feathr.
Yeah, and this is actually the first. Aidan and I have been working together now for close to 2 years, but it's the first webinar we've done together. So it'll be fun to do this with you,
Fun one, yeah.
Aidan, kind of go through it. So before we dive in, we are going to ask a poll question. I like to kind of do this to try to get a sense of where the audience is. And kind of the question I was pondering is, as an audience here, how concerned are you about your funding for your 2025 budget? So you're going to see a poll question pop up there. I'd love for everyone just to drop in and give your answers, whether you have no concerns at all about your budget, and really kind of thinking about, there's been so much in the realm, and we're going to talk a lot about this, about the uncertainty about grant funding, federal funding, even some of the decline in individual funding. But just broadly, how are you feeling about your funding there? And so I'm going to have Isa talk or let us know when she can share those results. So we'll give everybody just another minute. Make sure you fill it out, and then
Yeah, happy to hop on just for a sec to kind of see or share what I'm seeing on the back end here. Results are still coming in, but only one person said no concerns at all. Looks like we have about 46% saying they're moderately concerned, 43% are very concerned, and then 8% have already had some funding cut. So
yeah,
definitely heavy on those middle two answers, but there is concern to be sure.
And I guess at some level, based on the title of this webinar, you may not be joining if you weren't concerned around budget shrinking and things like that. If you want to close the poll there. Okay, and so I think the thing that has really stood out to me, and again, this is where kind of the topic has started for Aidan and I a little bit, is uncertainty just the new normal, right? And I think it's something we've talked about a lot. And I think broadly, it's starting to feel like maybe, Aidan, the answer there is just yes.
Yeah, I mean, you can go back to financial crisis, and then there's Crimea, and then there's, a series of presidential elections that all feel like, history on the line, global pandemic. I mean, it's one thing after another. And
Yeah.
unfortunately, it seems like this is just normal.
And so I think, as we go through this, I think what we're going to do is kind of lay a little bit of the land from our seats being in the nonprofit tech space, a little bit about, how we're seeing some of this and what are the things that we believe are, threats or even concerns to the um, to the whole sector. And so we're going to kind of lay some of that foundation for nonprofits and then talk about a little bit about also just honestly and kind of unapologetically, a little bit of our opinions about how you can go about uh, pushing back against those threats or risks. And so, the one thing that's been an elephant in the room for us, and we've talked about it a lot, is the rhetoric that has been coming from, and we'll call it out. We'll put him up here, specifically Elon Musk, right? Like in the rhetoric around Doge and stuff like that. And the thing I want to point out about this is that there was a podcast done. It was 3 weeks ago, and just on YouTube alone, there's been 13 million views, right? And I know Aidan specifically, called out this quote that was used. And so, Aidan, I'd love you shared some of this on LinkedIn, but I'd love to hear some of your thoughts about what some of the things that were said. Because it
Yeah, I'll
was,
just say this is the part that's not normal, right?
yeah,
There is a very new element here of direct attack on the nonprofit sector from some very, very powerful and influential people, and front and center right here is Elon Musk. And he doubled down on this after this initial interview. So first it was on the Joe Rogan show, which, as you pointed out, 13 million views on YouTube, 5 million plus on Spotify and so forth. So one of the most listened podcasts in the world. But he's gone on additional interviews with Ted Cruz since then, and other words, where he has doubled down on this positioning around nonprofits being a scam. And he keeps saying things like people cash out of their nonprofits, or people make expense everything and buy jets and homes and all sorts of things. That's a direct quote. So yeah, this is the part that's a very concerning, to put it mildly, and it feels very much like a threat to any sense of normalcy for the nonprofit sector.
yeah. And I think the thing I would call out, Aiden, is that I agree with you about it not being normal. And I mean, obviously, there has been fraudulent nonprofits out there, right? Like that have existed and have been nefarious, but like that's like the fraction of those is so minor to the nonprofits that are doing huge, great work, right? And we know from the seats that we've been able to sit in with you at Feathr, and then me having the opportunity to work at several other nonprofit tech companies, that there's the world needs this sector and this sector to be thriving, right? And so this attack feels so frustrating for me as someone who's decided that I'm going to spend my career attempting to provide software to organizations to do good. And of course,
It's hugely damaging too. I mean,
yeah,
some of the specific things being said about there's no oversight, right? There's no oversight,
yeah,
there's no checks and balances, there's no inspection of the federal, grants in particular, I think was what he was referring to in some of this. But that's just completely false, right? I mean,
yeah,
ask any nonprofit that's received federal funding if there's, zero oversight of what they do, right? I mean, in most cases, it's a reimbursement model where you don't even get the money until after you spent it. You have to document everything. There's very stringent grant reporting requirements. And so these blatant statements that are just completely false, that are reaching, huge portions of the American population. And this is doing a lot of damage, to trusts in the sector, and is shaping the viewpoints of many people about what nonprofits are and how they operate, unfortunately.
yeah. And I think to put a bow on this, right? This was kind of the straw that broke the camel's back, I think, for Aidan and I both, and many people in our organization, where it felt like we had to kind of stand up and be an advocate for the sector and say that, again, this is not normal, this is not accurate, and these broad sweeping statements are not helping really at all in any sort of way. And so I think it was kind of some of the catalysts for us wanting to put together this webinar. And so, but this isn't the only thing, right? Like there's other things that we're seeing as trends in the market that I think maybe aren't as much of way as like direct attacks or threats, but are more of things that we should be paying attention to. And so, Aidan, this was something I know you had pulled. Like, what are we seeing here that's kind of happened over the last 20 years in terms of, giving from a household perspective and things like that?
Yeah, so I'm sure many of you have seen these stats. This one comes from Giving USA. I think the next slide shows one for Canadian taxpayers, which is measured in a slightly different way, but it shows the same type of trend. There's another stat from Bank of America with the was it the Lilly Institute of Philanthropy? But they all show the same thing, which is that over the last couple of decades, there has been a consistent downward decline in the participation rate. The number of American individuals, American households, Canadian households that contribute to charitable causes. And so there's this long-standing downward trend that definitely predates the recent months' events, where individual donors, the amount of them and the participation rate of them continues to decline. Hey, you're on mute, Bradley.
Thank you. Sorry, of all times for the people to mow their yard beside our house, it happens to be right now. So hopefully you guys aren't picking up that noise. But here's the Canadian slide, right? So again, trends where, from a standpoint of Canadian tax filers, so I think this is a thing that we're all paying attention to, and we're all aware of it, right? But I do think that this is something we should be paying close attention to and thinking about how to, kind of reverse some of these trends, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think another stat that we're seeing, right, it's a concentration of the donations coming from a smaller and smaller set of wealthier and wealthier people, right, as opposed to the more grassroots support, from a larger portion of kind of like the everyday population. And I would say, yeah, that's a concerning trend. But maybe there's also another side of it, which is, a little bit more opportunistic, or, how can we change some hearts and minds here, right? I mean, there's a very large portion of the, in this case, Canadian population, the previous slide, the American population. If they're not donating at all, in some sense, then very literally, there's no competition with other nonprofits for their share of wallet. How can we tap into that? How can we change this outlook? How can we change this trend? How can we reach some of these people? It's very large, depending on which stat you look at, half or more of the population that's not contributing at all to charitable giving. How can we get some of them back? And I think, there's an inverse there. Obviously, the trend, very concerning, but there's also this other side, which is like, hey, it's that green field, blue ocean, right? Is there some way that we can reach some of those people who are not giving at all? Can you convince them to give to your organization? So I think there's something there.
We've talked about it at length, and we're not going to get deep into it in this presentation, or in this conversation, but there's definitely a whole thing to be unpacked there about the transfer of wealth from generation to generation. Also, that is a whole nother topic that we've done several hours of content on, but it's worth thinking about how the impact that's also having on this. We're, a preview to some stats that we've recently put together. So we'll have our 2025 State of Nonprofit Marketing coming out, and hopefully Isa and the team doesn't get too mad at me for sharing a couple of preview stats out of it. But I thought some of these were really interesting because as those individual donor, numbers are going down, still the trend that's interesting is when we asked of all the different ways you raise, funds, individual donors were still the far and away the one that is across every organization for the most part. 88% of organizations are still rely on individual donors to fund their mission, right? And so I think these are in some ways kind of juxtaposition stats, right? That that I think are, again, we need to be paying attention to. And I don't think what we're going to suggest here as any way that you should be moving away from individual donors. It should be that you're even leaning in more, but ways to maybe engage them in helpful ways that can get you to your point, maybe get in front of that green field, or to engage the donors you already have in a better way.
Yeah, I mean, given the clearly stated views of the current administration around federal funding to the nonprofit sector in the United States, I think it's obviously going to be even more top of the list in everyone's strategies going forward of how do we strengthen our individual giving program, how do we grow it, how do we reach net new, how do we, if we didn't have a grassroots kind of like component of our fundraising efforts. How do we grow that now? If we didn't have a recurring giving, monthly subscription type arm, how do we add that now? So, yeah, I mean, I think it's probably top of mind, front and center for everybody, um, especially those who maybe previously have been more reliant on grants. How do we shift that?
Yeah. This was just one other thing that it's kind of interesting, but it's just another thing to be paying attention to, right? Is that it's not only that we've kind of got this rhetoric out there, and also we've got some declining numbers of individual donors. It's also getting more expensive to get in front of donors, specifically through traditional means. Like, this is a good example of the cost of sending mail in the United States and how it has the actual cost of stamps or cost of mailing packages has actually outpaced inflation, right? Which is it was more of just a point to point out that we're going to have to continue to rethink the ways we engage and where donors are spending their time and things like that. And so where do we go from here, right? So what are our suggestions? And so this is where, again, Aidan and I are going to be a little unapologetic about sharing some of our thoughts from, we get this really amazing opportunity to go spend a lot of time at events and hear really amazing speakers talk about how to do some of all this. And we spend a lot of time kind of thinking about what are the things that we're seeing that are working, what are the things that are interesting. And so we're just going to share some of those thoughts with you guys. And so we're going to start off with a conversation around just being digital first. And so first off, there's a reason that we feel like this is really important, right? And so Aidan, why don't you share a little bit about what's broken out here?
Yeah, so 7 hours and 3 minutes per day was the stat in the report released last year about the average time spent using the internet every day. This is from Americans aged 16 to 64. So 7 hours and 3 minutes every single day. Depending on which stats you look at, I've seen another one for 2022 that was saying it was as high as 8 hours and 20 minutes per day. So whether it's 7 hours, it's 8 hours, it's a lot of time, right? People are spending almost half of waking hours on the internet every single day. And you can see some of this here about how that's broken out between different devices. People check their phones 144 times per day. That was a stat that I just looked up from 2024. And so this is where people are, this is where people spend their time, and this is where donors increasingly are available to be engaged.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting, and I think I hear those stats, and I want them to not be true about myself, but like obviously we work for an internet company, so we spend a lot of time. But that 3 hours spent using the internet on mobile phones, I really want that to not be true. But I actually looked at my screen time recently.
I was gonna say, it'll tell you. You can check.
And I won't admit that how bad it is, but it's similar. It's definitely there. And so I think this is something that it's unavoidable, right? That everyone's online, everyone is on these devices constantly, and it's where we spend the majority. We talk about the share of wallet, but it's the share of attention. It's where we are spending our time.
Though I'll add about the share of wallet. I mean, you look at the same thing, percentage of all retail sales that have gone to online retail and e-commerce. That chart is aggressively up and to the right. Total dollars spent through online transactions, the same thing. So increasingly, it's also where people spend their money in addition to their time.
Yeah, 100%. And so, actually Next After, which if you don't follow Next After, they have just amazing content and they produce so much data. And there's someone I followed for many, many years and shared a lot of their data, but they recently did a report that was all around digital first. And what does it mean to actually be digital first? And so I think what we're not suggesting is that digital first means that it's digital only, right? What we're more suggesting is to ensure that as you are doing your campaigns, you are thinking about it more through the lens of how do you use your digital, your online resources to be the primary way you're capturing donations, you're driving people to those things, even if it's offline tactics like direct mail, events, things like that. How are you driving people to your digital assets? And then how are you using those digital footprints to continue to stay in front of people. And so we're going to go through quite a bit of that. Aidan, I think you had mentioned, wasn't there a stat? And sorry, I might be putting you on the spot because I think you mentioned it specifically, or you said that you thought there was one about like the percentage of people who want to give online versus not. Was that something
Yeah,
that?
so right, the stat I just pulled on that was 64% of donors said that they prefer to make their donation online with a credit card. That was
Yeah.
from, I think Double the Donation was the one who put that one out. So it was one of their research
Yeah.
stats. But that's 64%, so a significant majority. It's the preferred method of donating is through a credit card online.
And so maybe a good question here is just, are you being digital first in the way that you think about your running your campaigns, right? And so the other thing Next After put out as part of the study was that digital first organizations are growing 12.7 times percent faster than the average nonprofit, right? So they're growing significantly faster. And this specifically again comes down to the idea of how are they thinking through or ensuring that all of their campaigns either have a digital element and or are led from a digital stance. And so we put together some examples of organizations and that kind of show how this comes to life. And so, Aidan, do you want to share a little bit about some of these examples? I think we have 3 different examples we can go through here just to give some ideas of what we mean.
Yeah, and if you click the second half of this one will appear, but just showing a couple of quick tactics here, right? And so this is one where multi-channel digital marketing to drive online giving, where you can send emails and target digital ads to the same email list, right? So whatever that segment is that you have in your CRM, whether it's re-engaging lapsed donors or some other type of targeted group, or these are the people I want to reach with my appeal. This is the proactive version where it's easy to just kind of 1-2 punch where you pull the list and obviously you can send them emails, but you can also do this type of list match or email mapping where then these types of digital ads will follow that same list of people, will follow them around the web onto phones, across the internet, and so forth. And so this is like one quick, significantly higher performing type of marketing effort than if you just sent emails or if you just targeted display ads, doing it to the same people. Say like over 4 weeks, you're sending 1 email a week and you're going to target this ad set to them over the same 4-week span, right? Significantly improves the performance of both. And if you click over to the next one, and yeah, Karen, great to hear that. Yeah, I'm sure many of you here, you chose to join this webinar. We're probably preaching to the choir, but I hope that some of what we're arming you with today, both on the stats and some of the tactics, is to bolster your own case internally, if that's where you're at. And this is just showing a similar idea, right? But more of a reactive version. So what this is showing here is a marketing automation type of use case where you're setting a trigger. In this case, it's shopping cart abandonment is what they call this in online retail, right? Where you're setting up these triggers saying people who have been to my donation page but didn't complete the donation, I want to re-engage them, right? And you can set this up so that it will run automatically. So as individual people go to that page, maybe even start the donation process. This is actually an example more of purchasing tickets to a specific show. So in the case of performing arts and museums, maybe it's through the ticketing checkout. In most cases, it'll be more through a standard donation form process. How do you make sure that you don't just let even a high performing landing page is like what, 25%, maybe 30% if you're absolutely crushing it. 15 to 20% is pretty normal in terms of the conversion rate of landing pages and donation forms. And so for the other 70%, 75%, 80% of people who are visiting that page and not donating, don't just let them kind of slip away, right? And so this is showing here how you can do that same type of multi-channel re-engagement, but in this case, you're setting it up as a trigger, and then it will just automatically run and re-engage people once they meet that criteria, once they kind of cross that tripwire, if you will, in this case of starting a checkout process but not completing it. And this one is showing, Instagram and Facebook ads in the news feed, whereas the previous one was showing more of the display ads that are animated that kind of follow you around the web. Better yet, you could have it do both. You could do 1, 2, 3 with email, display ads, and social advertising, kind of all automatically triggering off of this action.
Yeah, and I think Aidan, the most recent stat I saw was from M&R, M&R benchmark, where said
Mm-hmm.
85% of website visitors who even have an intention of donating, that land on a donation page, are going to not give, right? So 15% conversion rate is the average, with many being much lower. And so to your point of being able to drive people to those pages is step one, right? Step two is once they get there, staying in front of them, even if they don't complete the action on the page, whether that's signing up to volunteer, whether that's
Right.
registering for an event, registering to be a member, or giving a one-time or recurring donation.
And on that note, this is kind of a segue from that point. So the prior two examples were examples where you have someone in your CRM and you're trying to engage them across these two different ways, right? The first one was you have a list, you throw that list to match, target them with ads as well as sending emails. The second one relied on this idea of being able to match a contact record from the CRM to a website visitor, which marketing tools can do, Feathr included. This example here, though, is showing how even for people who are not in your CRM, you can still apply some of these digital tactics, right? And so in this case, this is another version of that shopping cart abandonment retargeting. But in this case, where we don't have their email address, they're not matched to somebody in our CRM. So this is an anonymous website visitor, or realistically, it's probably hundreds or thousands of anonymous website visitors, right, every month that are coming to your donation pages, but not contributing. And this is showing too how you can not only re-engage those anonymous people and follow them in this case, across the web onto the Food Network and wherever it is they're going, but it allows you to also really tailor the messaging, right? So you can see the copy in this ad in the middle is very clearly like calling them out. It's like, forget something, complete your donation here, right? So it's a chance to be very tailored and specific in your, marketing copy or fundraising copy. So not only this tactic of re-engaging it, but actually calling it out in the ad.
Yeah, I think Aidan, something I've heard as kind of a objection to this every now and then is that some of this seems freaky, or like, it's a little bit scary that you can do some of this. But I think, like, how many times have we been to Amazon or Target or whatever retail store you go on online, and then you're looking at a very specific pair of boots or a hat or something like that, and then that hat happens to follow you around the internet. I think this is very similar to those tactics that are used by some of the bigger retailers or even smaller retailers, right? It's a very common tactic. And so if this is something you're not doing, it is by far one of the most successful type of campaigns we see people
100%.
running to get a positive ROI, because it also is very cost effective to do this, because you're not just casting a wide net, you're casting a net to individuals who are already familiar with your organization. You've already done the work to create the awareness. Now you're just trying to keep them engaged, and they've come and shown interest. So I spend so much time talking about retargeting campaigns and how valuable they are, because you control cost and they perform so well. And so I think it's just something, if you're not doing it, if anything you walk away with today, right, is you should be doing retargeting ads, right?
And the most bang for your buck is always going to be the people who have been to the donate page and leave, right?
Yeah.
But you can easily imagine how you might do this slightly differently for the volunteer page, for who's looked at the impact report or the annual report or whatever type of impact section of your website, or people who have only been to the homepage, right? Maybe the goal of people visiting the homepage, let's retarget them to drive them to the impact report section or the annual report section, right? And then people who've looked at that but have not been to the donate page, maybe we target them with ads about donating, right? So you can start thinking about how, depending on which pages of the website someone has visited but has not visited, you might create slightly different messaging, right, in the ads.
Yeah. And I think something that often goes missing in the conversation is maybe you're just trying to get in front of the population you serve more, right? Maybe you have the ability for people to come sign up for, a trial, or sign up for whatever service your organization offers, and you want to stay in front of them, right? Like in terms of, they came to the page that is about how you serve, and you want to make sure you're staying in front of those people. That is a great way
Right.
to do
And
that.
obviously that depends on your mission and the population that you serve. But I mean,
Yeah.
we've had a number of great examples of that. An affordable housing organization that they had units and they didn't have enough qualified applicants, and so they used digital advertising and geofencing specific neighborhoods and specific areas to reach. We've seen it with humane societies, right? Targeting pet owners or people who have affinity for pets, right? So different ways you can promote the programs and services that you offer to further the mission. Absolutely.
Yeah, Amy, you asked a really good question. It's like, what's the average cost budget of a retargeting campaign as a nonprofit? They vary greatly, right? Like it really depends on how much traffic you're driving to the page or pages you want to retarget people from. So if you might be driving a ton of website traffic to your overarching page, but you just want to retarget the people who hit your donation page. That can help you control costs. But it does vary wildly based on the number of web traffic, the amount of web traffic you have. And so I think it's hard to say, like it could start for what Aidan, even, a couple $100 a month, might be enough to cover all the web traffic you have. And then we have customers spending sometimes, thousands of dollars a month because they have a much larger presence and that budget makes sense for them.
And that is one of the nice things about retargeting is it can scale, right? You can choose to limit it at first and say, I only want to target, the most bang for my buck, which is donation page visitors. You can start broadening it to different sections of the website or your whole homepage. Or if you have a little bit larger budget, you can consider, I want to start reaching net new people who have never been to my website, right? And that's a whole different set of advertising targeting as well.
Yeah. So sorry, Amy, that might feel like a non-answer, but it is kind of the most honest answer that it really does kind of vary, greatly. This was one other stat that I just found so interesting from the Next After report that they put out recently. And it was what it looks like when you combine online and offline tactics and how that improves results, right? And so what they pointed out here was that direct mail only gets a 14.9% conversion rate. Email only gets a 1.4% conversion rate. And then direct mail and email together, when it's a coordinated campaign, gets a 24% conversion rate, which is a 61% increase in donor conversion. And so the way, you might ask where they get the stats from. The way they're able to get these stats is that they're actually an agency that works with some of the largest organizations in the United States. And so they can do these big scale tests. And so this is one of the things that they test with some of their clients and found this to be consistent across not only just one client, but several clients. And so it's such an interesting point of being digital first in terms of saying, I've got some direct mail I'm going to send, or I'm going to send a direct mail appeal. Why don't we also be sure that we're including everyone we possibly can from if we have their address and their email and making a dual appeal in both places. And so just thought that was really
something I always appreciate about Next After is they publish the results of their experiments.
Yeah.
And you mentioned M&R. M&R does a little bit of this too, Whole Whale. So there's a couple other, the agencies out there that really like open source their process quite a bit. Whole Whale, M&R, and then of course Next After, who we're citing here. Great sources of insight.
And those are all really reputable places if you're going to look for some data, going back to who was it, Karen, about your board. If you want to go find some actual data to support some of the stuff that you want to try or attempt, those are some great sources to do that because they're kind of done at scale and really trustworthy. So a couple other things to think about, right, is that this also, sorry, Isa, but came from the State of Nonprofit Marketing. But as I was kind of perusing through some of that data, one of the things that really stood out to me is that 51% of nonprofits do not use digital marketing in the majority of their fundraising campaigns. And I just thought that was fascinating because as we're talking about digital first, right, and as we're talking about how beneficial some of this is, it was fascinating to me that still a lot of organizations, it appears, either don't prioritize this or maybe don't know how, and so I think it's just a really interesting stat and juxtaposition. It also, going back to the green field, feels like a big opportunity, right? Wouldn't you say that, Aidan?
Absolutely. I mean, just start small if you have to, but start layering in some digital marketing, right? And these are people who are saying they're not using digital marketing on the majority of their fundraising campaigns, right? So even just layering in some But better yet is if you make that shift to really thinking digital forward, digital first, right? How can we fully kind of from the top down be imagining this from the standpoint of that online donation experience and how we're driving people there? But even just starting with some of the things like retargeting and doing emails plus advertising kind of and joint campaigns, you could see some real immediate impact.
Yeah. Abel, looks like you have a little bit of like a really specific question, so I think like we can follow up with you maybe after the webinar and have some a conversation about that a little bit more detail. Or it looks like maybe Issa's answering some of your questions there. So now this Aidan, you put some of this data together. I'd love for you to speak to it a little bit because we kind of get the benefit of as being a platform that helps people do some of these type of campaigns, seeing some interesting data, right?
Right. So, this is based on analysis of Feathr has just over 1,000 nonprofit customers, and so this was based on analysis of 2024 across the entire customer base of all nonprofits using Feathr in their digital marketing efforts. And what we found was those that spent at least $1,000 a month on digital advertising saw a median of 5.3x return on investment and an average of 14.1x return on investment. And that return on investment was not just return on the media budget, like the advertising dollars, but also the costs of the Feathr platform included in that too. But I highlight this median one here because this means, again, that the majority, this half of the Feathr customer base had this level of return on investment, right? So this is like right down the middle of customers that were spending $1,000 a month or more on digital advertising, half or more saw a 5.3x return on investment. So this sort of ties back to the question earlier, about how much to spend. And one of the nice things about digital advertising is that you can start small and you can experiment. But certainly, what our data has found is that once you cross some level of spend, which, in this analysis was if you crossed $1,000 a month of investment, the return started getting significantly higher in proportion to, customers that were spending smaller amounts of money per month.
Yeah, Aidan, I just left the P2P professional kind of symposium in Atlanta. I was there 2 weeks ago, and this was a big source of topic about like the amount of money spent in advertising and how much the ROI that you get when you do spend a certain amount in advertising versus if you spend nothing, the actual decrease you see. So there was actually harm done when you spent nothing versus and I forget the exact percentages, but there were some percentages that were of the revenue amounts of the specific organizations where they were getting about it was very similar because it was a 14% return on average when they were spending a certain amount. And so I think it's a we're kind of seeing this not only through the Feathr platform, but other content producing organizations and things like that are also gathering some of this information and publicizing it too. And so thinking about, I would, as you think about when we're talking about digital ads too, can you be a little bit more explicit? Like what does digital advertising actually mean? Like what kind of campaigns would those be?
Yeah, and we showed a few examples before, but I mean, there's what's called display, right? Display campaigns, your classic banner ads. But even within that, there's a lot of interesting things one could do, right? You could do these animated ads. You could do things that are specifically designed for mobile. You can do campaigns that will reach people across multiple devices, which is something that, Feathr recently made a technology upgrade to make that a lot easier to do. So like automatically targeting the same person across their phone and their computer, right, in apps as well as on websites. So that's kind of your classic digital advertising, which is those types of display ads, which again, they can be animated and so forth. But then you also have, social advertising, right? And so, in Fethr's case, we integrate with Meta, so you can go into the Facebook news feed, the Instagram news feed. Again, that's both on web and on mobile. And so that's another form of digital advertising where you're showing up as native social ads in the feed, targeting the specific people you're trying to reach. And I think a big part of digital advertising, one part of it is where do the ads show up, right? And so another component of it, though, and the more important component is who are you trying to reach, right? Because often the premise here is define who you're trying to reach and then let it reach them sort of wherever they go, because it's more about the audience. It's an audience first approach where you're trying to re-engage the specific group of people, the people who've been to my donate page, right? That's a very specific group. Or if you're layering in, like interests and demographic data and location data, right? That's a very specific group you can build, and then you want to reach those people as they go on social media or as they browse the web, right? Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that's such an interesting thing because what has become available over, the last 10 years or so through digital marketing and programmatic advertising and things like that is so much. I think until you get in and actually start using it, it's sometimes hard to comprehend all the different ways you can segment and get really specific, even if you don't have that person's information in your database already, or they haven't subscribed to your email list, or whatever. Like, we can get still really targeted with all these platforms to be able to get you in front of the audience that is actually worth your spend to be in front of, right? Which I think has always been a little bit more difficult with traditional advertising, means.
Right.
And so
one
for
other quick thing I'll chat, Bradley, is it also, you can do video advertising as part of this too, right? I mean, you can think about like 15-second, what sometimes is called pre-roll ads, but if you've ever
yeah,
gone on CNN.com or you go on ESPN.com to watch a sports highlight, right? And there's that 15-second ad at the beginning. That's actually quite easy to do as well. Maybe people think that's this very intimidating process or it must be super expensive. It's really not. It's the same type of automatic
yeah,
follow the people around type of thing. If you have a 15-second video ad, you can do retargeting. And it'll just, when they go to a place that has the opportunity for a 15-second video ad, Feathr is just dynamically trying to place your 15-second video ad in front of that specific person when they're on, again, ESPN to watch sports highlights for March Madness or whatever it might be. So actually doing that type of video ad retargeting is again, become very accessible to do. And you can also do video ads for that matter in Facebook and Instagram, right? In the news feeds, the same idea. So it's an opportunity as well. Obviously, you have to be able to make a video ad, which might take a little bit more effort, whereas Canva has made it so easy to make
yeah.
visual ads.
Yeah, if you don't have a Canva account, they have a free pro subscription for nonprofit organizations, verified nonprofit organizations. So just an amazing tool. John had a really good question, and
Oh
it's
yeah.
Aidan, would you recommend? And sorry, I kind of like taking questions throughout. We probably aren't going to have a lot of time for questions at the end, but again, we want to kind of keep this conversational. So would you recommend using display ads for acquisition and awareness and meta or social ads for retargeting? Do you have an
I think
opinion
it's
on
short.
that?
That probably aligns with like the superpowers of those two. Yes. That said, it's not like retargeting with display ads is not going to be effective. It will be effective. I do think it's common to do the split that John has outlined here of, I think the superpower display ads is the kind of like awareness and the nurturing and staying top of mind, following people around throughout the web, right? Because it's not just reaching them in one place like Facebook, Instagram. You can kind of stay in front of them around many websites as they go around the web. It's also more affordable, whereas native social advertising tends to be more expensive to place those ads. And so that's another reason why often people will choose to, if they're going to spend their bullets on paid social, maybe only do so for retargeting people who are already engaged, because again, it's just a little bit more expensive to reach people in the news feed. So yeah, I think long way of saying that's a common split of saying let's do display ads for awareness and social for kind of like driving the action, driving the conversion type campaign, bottom of the funnel. But you can do retargeting through display and it will still be quite effective for following people around, for staying top of
Yeah.
mind. And it will enhance the impact of your email marketing too. So I think just tying it back to that, even if people don't click the display ad, if you are running that type of retargeting campaign against an email list or against your website traffic while sending emails, you will see a higher click-through rate and ultimately conversion rate to donations or event signups or whatever it is from doing those two things in concert. So it's not always the display ad that will drive that click, but if you do display ads and email marketing together, you will see a higher click-through rate from the emails too.
Yeah.
So just a couple of comments there.
Yeah, and John, I think first off, let me say, not at all derailing the conversation. This was the point of this whole thing, was to start a conversation and just to have some. And so we'd much rather engage with you guys than just talk at you. I think from like a tracking standpoint, there's a couple different levels you can go into, but like one of the more basic things to be able to do some of the retargeting things is if you're just able to add a small piece of JavaScript to your website, you're able to then start tracking individuals and retargeting them across social ad networks, things like that. And then one of the things Feathr launched not too long ago, it's really powerful. Aidan's already mentioned it, but the ability to track people across multiple devices. So if you are able to connect, they visited the website on your phone, oftentimes we can we can also target them on like their computer and maybe their tablet and things like that. So we got still a little bit to go through here, so we're gonna probably speed up it just a little bit but go through a couple other things that we had on our mind. This was something that really stood actually for me coming back from the peer-to-peer conference. I was sitting on a panel and I was actually moderating it, and Cassandra from PanCan was on the panel, and I hadn't heard this before, but it sounded like several people in the audience had. But it was relationships move at the speed of trust. And what that really hit me was as a marketer, as someone who runs marketing, but then also thinking about organizations, how do we actually build trust? And so for organizations, the thing that hit me was that really your impact you're making is the value we give back to our donors, right? And I think if the honest kind of critical feedback I might want to give to organizations broadly, because I think organizations have done a great job at asking for appeals and things like that. I think you don't shout from the mountaintops enough the impact you're making. And so I have an actual very specific example of this, right? So this is an organization that I support, right? It's called Both Hands. They're here in Nashville. My friend, it's not JT, but my friend Jared is the executive director there. And as I was kind of thinking about this, I was thinking, I wonder, I don't know that I've ever seen how Both Hands shares with me their impact. I went to my inbox, I found this email, right? Couple things about this. One is I hadn't opened the email yet. It's from December 19th, 2024. I hadn't opened it. I'm admittedly, I have a very terrible inbox, but I hadn't opened this email. It hadn't got to me. So I fell in that, 80% or so of people who aren't going to open the email, but they're sharing their impact of what they did for the year, right? Which is great. I'm really excited about all the work they did. I didn't have any other email in my inbox or anything from the whole year that shared this information. Right. So they sent it out once and they sent it via email and I never opened it, and I'm a supporter of theirs. I can't remember seeing it anywhere else. That doesn't mean that they haven't shared it on Facebook or they haven't shared it in other places, but it really stood out to me as a actual tangible example of how, sometimes we share our impact and we'll send an email out with the information in it. But if you're being honest with yourself, how many people are actually seeing that and taking it in, right? And so I think it's something just to consider is how are you building trust by sharing in return what your organization was able to accomplish, the impact you were able to make with the donations you receive from individuals. The classic thing you typically see is a thank you letter right after the donation, sharing some things about the impact you're going to do. But I think coming back around and sharing often that impact releases endorphins for the donor, right? Like there's actually a chemical, thing that happens there that it helps the donor feel good about what they did in terms of supporting your organization. So that was just something I wanted to call out. It hit me really hard these last couple of weeks. And so last section we're going to kind of go through here is that we also think, similar to sharing your impact more, we just think organizations need to get comfortable being louder, right? Like being willing to take up that share of voice, that share of wallet a little bit more. And so, Aidan, this is an image you've used a couple of times. Like you want to kind of hit on your thoughts around this?
Yeah, so there used to be something called the rule of seven, which it takes, 7 advertising touch points before someone notices a message. That was coined in, I think, the 1930s at a very different time, right? And people have tried to say, what's the rule of seven today in advertising? People range from saying, is it 20 or is it 500 times before the message sinks
I
in?
heard it peer-to-peer 500 was one of the that was static. Yeah, yeah.
Well, so a related stat, which I think is what this captures here, is the amount of broadly like marketing or brand exposure points that the average American adult has per day is estimated between 3,000 and 5,000, right? And again, that's not all like specifically seeing digital ads. That's everything from the logo on, the package that your cereal in the morning and so forth. So that's like kind of every brand touch point. But it just kind of goes to show that we live in a very marketing forward, right, and brand forward time where consumer brands are quite aggressively and quite loudly, right, making their presence known in their effort to build, awareness, to gain your loyalty, and ultimately to gain your share of wallet, right? So the lengths and the efforts and the money that are being spent by consumer marketing and consumer brands are incredible, right? And the amount of, again, touch points that we're inundated with every day, there's a lot of noise. I think your kind of next slide touches on that.
Yeah, this was kind of the same thing to point out, but from my own personal inbox, and right. And so what I was wanting to point out is like, are you grabbing your fair share of the inbox? And so what I actually looked at was the emails I got from Amazon, the last 7 emails. Look how frequent they are, right? One's from today, but it's really in the last 4 days. I've got 7 emails from Amazon. So that's what 1.8 a day or something like that. But then if I go back over to my friends over at Both Hands, right, I've received 7 emails since December 31st. So 7 emails this year, right? So I guess it would have been maybe pretty impactful if I would have actually said the percentage of how much more Amazon's, but I don't have it off the top of my head. But I think the thing that I often hear, we say it here at Feathr a lot, is we don't want to abuse people's inboxes, right? I think the thing to consider is how far your pendulum is swung from doing that, right? And I think I pointed out sometimes here at Feathr is like, we don't want to send more than 1 email per day. If you have something good to say, right, it might be worth sending more than 1 email per day, right? Or it
Hey, to
may
your
just
point,
be,
how far away from that are you today, right? Are you
yes,
sending
exactly.
2 emails a month, even 1 email a week, right? You're pretty far away from,
Yeah,
yeah. I just check my own inbox too,
yeah,
right? Like, Levi's, or I gave my email over to them.
yeah,
I'm getting an email a day from them with different sales and different deals, right?
yeah. And Kurt, I think it's Kirsty. You make a great point, right? I don't open any of the Amazon ones, and I have opened a lot of the ones from Both Hands, right? And so there's probably a really good balance in between somewhere, but I don't think Both Hands is probably in my inbox enough. Amazon's definitely there a little too much. I don't unsubscribe because I want to actually know when my things are coming, and I'm I'm getting them. And so, but I think the juxtaposition is something to think about as to where you should fall in the middle. There's some easy testing to do here. Watch your opt-out rate, maybe increase the number. I know, Aidan, I see and talk to so many organizations who are just sending one monthly newsletter, right? There's such an opportunity to get beyond that. And there's a lot of ways now to automate some of that so it doesn't feel so heavy that you're having to write emails every day, every twice a week or whatever. And so
Right.
something,
And it's something to think about. Like, I know sometimes we hold up examples like Amazon or Levi's or whatever, and it feels like, hey, these are huge corporations and are so far away. But I would challenge you to look at your own inbox, and this extends for much further down as well, right? I just checked mine. There's something called the School of Life that I bought like a deck of conversation starter cards from them once, and they're emailing me also similarly, like about every day or two. That's a much smaller organization there. You can look at almost any of these direct consumer brands, right? Very small businesses that you might have bought something from. Uh, and just again, the question is what's the share of mind, the share of attention that we're getting, for the nonprofit sector in comparison to these consumer brands and consumer marketing that's taking place.
yeah. Well, I know we only have about 5 minutes left, so we're going to try to speed through, make sure we get you guys out of here on time. Aidan, you had put Diane's, kind of post in here. You want to hit a little bit on this?
Yeah, so I mean, the last couple slides we're talking about, competing with consumer marketing for attention, but I think this ties back to where we started here today, which is there are some very active negative narratives being put forward towards the nonprofit sector right now. So if there was ever a time to be louder and to be more self-promotional and to be more focused on telling our stories of impact, it's definitely today. And I just wanted to highlight, this quote from Diane, who's the president and CEO of the National Council for Nonprofits. And she says here, right, tell the story of all the good the nonprofits do in new, more highly visible ways to expand public support, right? So just +1 for this year. If there was ever a time to step up the level of marketing and self-promotion and shout from the rooftops, it's today.
Yeah.
So I
we
think we
hit a
already touched
couple
on a
of,
couple of these things here. I don't know if we have any more questions, but we just kind of showing a few more tactics, the same idea, those we talked before. Be louder, be in multiple channels, be in multiple places. You can go to the next one. Reach net new people. This is just highlighting a couple of ways you can target by keyword or by location, geofencing, right? Affinity towards certain causes. Reach new people, expand the pie. How can you how can you engage some people who are not currently in your CRM? That's what this is showing here. So be louder, be in more places, reach more people.
yeah. And I think before we, we're obviously going to share a little bit just briefly about Feathr. But I think this is more achievable than ever, right? Like with the advancements in, tools like Canva, with tools like Feathr, and things like this used to feel pretty daunting, right? And so I think there's a quite a bit of opportunity still here. Goodness. And so if this has felt daunting before, we'd love to talk to you. I think actually Issa's going to throw up a poll here really quickly as I kind of go through these last couple slides. Well, I actually, oh yeah, I can. But if you'd like to learn more about Feathr and our platform, we'd love to talk to you, right? Like, we're glad everyone's here, kind of taking in the content, but we'd be remiss if we didn't just take a minute to say, like, if you want to learn more about us, just let us know here. We're happy to give you a walkthrough. What
We
we
obviously
really
love geeking
do,
out about digital marketing. So
yeah, 100%.
you want to chat.
Yes. And so, at Feathr, our real mission, and we've really solidified this over the last couple of years, is we're here to help organizations grow, right? And we do that through digital advertising and digital marketing. And so, and growth to us, it looks like more awareness, where the local YMCA was, finds 163,000 potential donors and participants. It looks like bigger events, right? Where Same was able to gain 235 attendees, right? It looks like bigger impact, where the Palmetto Community Care, they sold nearly 1K additional tickets with our platform. And then the CRF, used digital ads to bring in over 107K in donations. And so this is our mission, right? It's to help organizations grow. And so I think we work with a lot, over 1,500 organizations. Here's just some of the logos. We'll take down that survey here in a few minutes, but do want to open it up to if there's any additional questions. I think Aidan and I might be able to hang out a little bit longer. I know we typically try to leave about 10, 15 minutes for questions, but I know I can hang out for a few more minutes. So if you have any questions, just drop them in the poll or in the chat. Aidan, I will ask you before we jump off, like, if you have one thing that if you want to share with organizations about how to be digital first, right? Like, if there's something that individuals or organizations are not doing today, what would be something you might recommend?
Yeah, I would come back to what we said before, which is, 85% of people who visit your donate page are leaving without making a donation. 80% of people who receive your emails are not opening them, right? Maybe you're a little bit better than that. You're still, maybe 70% of people are not opening your emails, right? So layering in this type of retargeting, even of just your website visitors and just the people in your CRM who you're emailing to, but layering in that level of retargeting as a place to start, reach those people who are abandoning the page, who are not opening the emails. Let's start doing it today.
Yeah, I would totally agree. I think that's something I share in almost every place I go talk, is that if you're not doing that, that is the lowest hanging fruit. It is a great way to dip your toe into digital advertising that goes beyond email marketing, right? Like, everyone's doing some email marketing, but if you want a place to really start, that's you can control costs while getting a good return, it's a really great place to start. Well, it looks like I know we answered quite a few questions throughout, which I'm really excited we got to do. Really appreciate everyone taking the time to join us today. This was a fun conversation, Aidan. I appreciate you taking the time to do it with me. And until next time, guys, we'll see you soon.
Thanks for joining, y'all. Have a great day.